Frankly, I'm offended by the tone and tenor of this hearing. I'm offended by a $4 trillion government bullying, berating, and badgering one of America's greatest success stories. You know, tell me one of these politicians up here who doesn't minimize their taxes. Tell me a chief financial officer that you would hire if he didn't try to minimize your taxes legally. Tell me what Apple's done that is illegal. I'm offended by a government that uses the IRS to bully Tea Parties, but I'm also offended by a government that convenes a hearing to bully one of America's greatest success stories. I'm offended by the spectacle of dragging in executives from an American company that is not doing anything illegal. If anyone should be on trial here, it should be Congress. I frankly think the committee should apologize to Apple. I think that the Congress should be on trial here for creating a bizarre and Byzantine tax code that runs into the tens of thousands of pages, for creating a tax code that simply doesn't compete with the rest of the world. This committee will admit that Apple hasn't broken any laws, yet we are forced to sit, and Apple is forced to sit through a show trial at the whims of politicians, when in fact Congress should be on trial for chasing the profits of great American companies overseas. We haul before this committee one of America's greatest success stories, and you want applause? I say instead of Apple executives, we should have brought in here today a giant mirror, okay? So we could look at the reflection of Congress, because this problem is solely and completely created by the awful tax code. If you want to assign blame, the committee needs to look in this mirror and see who created the mess. See who created this tax code that is chasing American companies overseas. Our corporate tax code is double Canada's. I never thought I'd be complimenting Canada for their tax code. Ours is double Canada, double a lot of Europe. Instead of complaining that theirs is too low, why don't we set about to work that ours is too high? Apple has 600,000 jobs they've created, American jobs, and we want to drag them before this committee to chastise them? I find it abominable. Just in my state, we have $700 million in sales from Dow Corning. They make the Gorilla Glass. They were virtually out of business. In the 1990s, Apple struggled. If I had to guess, unfortunately, I didn't guess enough to invest in Apple, but the thing is that in the 90s, people were worried they might go out of business. You know, they had one computer wasn't doing well, and then all of a sudden the innovation that came about. And we want to bring them forward and chastise them for their success. A couple of years ago, we did repatriation of foreign capital. If we want the capital to come home, don't double tax it. We tax it at 35%. Let's tax it at 5%. I have a bill that would repatriate profits from foreign companies at 5% and put it into infrastructure. Our country is woefully short of money for infrastructure. But you're not going to get it at 35%. You're getting zero. Let's make it 5% and create an infrastructure fund. There are probably 70 votes for that bill in Congress, but nobody will bring it up. Why? They say, oh, it's the sweetener for overall tax reform, which is elusive and a hill too tall to climb and never seems to get here. Why not tomorrow pass it? Why do you think people are frustrated with Congress? Because we don't do the right thing. Everybody admits, even those who want to drag Apple before this committee, they admit that our tax code's part of the problem. That if we had repatriation at 5%, that they would bring money home. Why don't we just pass it? Instead, it has to be revenue neutral, scored by the CBO. Just pass it if it's the right thing to do. I would say that what we really need to do is apologize to Apple, compliment them for the job creation they're doing, and get about doing our job. Look in the mirror and let's make the tax code better, fairer, and more competitive worldwide. Money goes where it's welcome. Currently, our tax code makes money not welcome in this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I think we need to restate for the record and be very clear here that neither this panel or anyone on the committee has said that Apple broke any laws. They're brought before this committee and harangued and bullied because they try to minimize their tax burden legally. I would argue that it would probably be malpractice for them not to do so. If you have a publicly held company and you have shareholders and your mandate to your chief financial officer is, please maximize our taxes, I'm guessing that that would probably be something that shareholders wouldn't accept. I don't know of any taxpayers who really do that. I don't know of anybody on this panel who tries to maximize their tax burden. I mean, my question for Mr. Harvey, do you take any deductions on your taxes?
Obviously, I do.
Do you choose to maximize your tax burden or minimize your tax burden?
Minimize it.
Do you think you're a bad person for doing that?
Absolutely not.
If you were advising as an accountant and an expert in the tax law, if you were advising a corporation and your mandate was to do what is best for their shareholders, would you advise them to count all their profit here at home at 35% or to try to do as much as they can legally to pay their taxes at a lower rate elsewhere?
Well, as I said in both my written and my oral testimony, certainly what Apple did does not appear in any way to be illegal. I think the question is a policy question as to whether they should be allowed to do it in the future.
Yeah, and as a policy question, talking about taxes, I think, is an appropriate thing for Congress. Bringing in an individual company and vilifying them for doing something that is in every business's mandate is objectionable. And that's why I object to these entire hearings, because talking about policy is one thing. For example, $1 trillion overseas. You want to bring it home? We have examples. We did it for 1 year at 5%. We brought in about $30 billion. We actually limited how much could come in. I say make it permanent, but make it permanent and make it low enough that people do it. If you permanently do this at 5%, the money will come home. But money goes where it's welcome. If we want to have high taxes, we're going to continue along this. Everybody talks about tax reform. Just do it. Other countries just do it. We have a 35% corporate income tax. We're chasing people away from us. If the outcome of this committee's hearing is evil Apple, let's go get them, let's go get companies like this and let's raise their taxes, guess what? Their headquarters may no longer be in Cupertino. They may be in Dublin with all their employees. They are the type of company, high-tech companies, that can relocate around the world. They aren't dependent on large manufacturing forces. So if you want to chase them out, bring them here and vilify them. It's exactly the wrong thing to do. We should be giving them an award today. We should be congratulating them on being a great American company and hiring people and not vilifying them for obeying the law. I mean, they are obeying the law. No one's accusing them of breaking the law. They're doing what their shareholders ask, which is to maximize profit. We have created this Byzantine and bizarre tax code and chased them overseas. But it's been going on a long time. But just fix it. We could fix it. There are 70 votes right now in the Senate for having a 5% repatriation tax. Those votes exist, but everybody says, oh, that's the sweetener for overall tax reform because so many people agree to it. Why not just pass it tomorrow? Same with the corporate income tax. We've made ourselves beholden to things like the CBO. They're like, well, the CBO will score that as a loss of revenue. Well, one, the CBO doesn't know a lot of times, I think, up from down, in the sense that you could change the corporate tax. There is such a number that you can lower it to where you'll get more revenue. I don't know what that number is, but that number does exist. We're at 35%. You have a couple $1 trillion overseas. There is some number you lower it to where that less money goes overseas and less people set up their companies to have the taxes overseas. So there are many ways you can do this. Repatriation would bring a lot home. But if we take it that this is a vendetta against American companies for trying to maximize profit, I think we really have missed the boat here. And really, I say once again, should be a giant mirror sitting there. We should be looking at ourselves. We should be talking about what we do. Overall tax reform, everybody wants to do it, but they say, oh, it has to be revenue neutral. That, to me, is absurd as well. That means we're just going to punish some more people and punish some people less. Why don't we try to reward the economy? Why don't we try to reward shareholders? Why don't we try to reduce taxes as a stimulus to the economy? Leave it with the people who earn it. So I'm very frustrated by the whole proceeding, particularly because of all these accusations. They're simply doing what every company does. In fact, if they're not, why don't we have the next hearing of companies who come in and their chief goal is, their stated goal is to maximize their tax burden. I want to see one company come before here and tell us that their goal is different than Apple's, that their goal is to maximize their tax burden. Taxes are simply a cost, and they try to minimize them legally. I do too. I take a home mortgage deduction. I take my kid deductions. I take all the deductions I can legally take. This kind of vilification has gone on before. FDR did it. The president did it in his campaign. This is something that's not good for the country. It pits one of us against another, and I think Senator Johnson really put it well when he said, who are these people? Is there a Mr. Apple out there? No, it's us. You know, if you have a mutual fund, you probably own some Apple shares. If you're a teacher with a pension fund, you own Apple shares. If you're a fireman with a pension fund, you probably own Apple. Apple's a great American company, and I don't even know if they'll know the breakdown, but I think it's interesting. Probably the vast majority, I would guess 70, 80% of the stock may be owned by Americans. And so who are we doing when we want to punish Mr. Apple? Who are we punishing? We're punishing ourselves. And if we want to grow America, we want more companies to succeed in our country, make money welcome. Money goes where it's welcome. And as much as you want to stuff the genie back in the box and say you must do this in America, companies can and will go everywhere. So let's make it a good place to work. Let's not vilify our American companies. And so what I would say, let's keep in mind what we're talking about today is not breaking of law. What we're talking about is a company doing what every company in America does, and that's trying to minimize their tax burden. Thank you.